Even if I sleep 20 minutes or half an hour, it is good. He lay forward, cramping himself against the lion with all of his body, putting all his weight onto his right hand, and he was asleep. He did not dream of the lions, but instead of a vast school of porpoises that stretched for 8 or 10 miles. And it was in the time of their mating, and they would leap high into the air and return with the same hole they had made in the water when they leaped. Then he dreamed that he was in the village on his bed, and there was a norther, and he was very cold, and his right arm was asleep because his head had rested on it instead of a pillow. After that, he began to dream of the long yellow beach, and he saw the first of the lions come down onto it in the early dark, and then the other lions came, and he rested his chin on the wood of the bows where the ship lay anchored with the evening offshore breeze, and he waited to see if there would be more lions, and he was happy. The moon had been up for a long time, but he slept on, and the fish pulled on steadily, and the boat moved into the tunnel of clouds. He woke with the jerk of his right fist coming up against his face and the line burning out through his right hand. He had no feeling in his left hand, but he braked all he could with his right, and the line rushed out. Finally, his left hand found the line, and he leaned back against the line, and now it burned his back and his left hand was taking all the strain and cutting badly. He looked back at the cause of line, and they were feeding smoothly. Just then, the fish jumped, making a great bursting of the ocean and then a heavy fall. Then he jumped again, and the boat was going fast, although the line was still racing out, and the old man was raising the strain to a breaking point, and raising it to breaking point again and again. He had been pulled down tight onto the bow, and his face was in the cut slice of dolphin, and he could not move. This is what we waited for, he thought. So now let us take it. They can pay for the line, he thought. They can pay for it. He could not see the fish's jumps, but only heard the breaking of the ocean and the heavy splash as he fell. The speed of the line was cutting his hands badly, but he had always known this would happen, and he tried to keep the cutting across the callous parts, and not let the line slip into the palm or cut the fingers. If the boy was here, he would wet the coils of line, he thought. Yes, if the boy were here. If the boy were here. The line went out and out and out, but it was slowing now, and he was making the fish earn each inch of it. Now he got his head up from the wood and out of the slice of fish that his cheek had crushed. Then he was on his knees, and then he rose slowly to his feet. He was seating the line, but more slowly all the time. He worked back to where he could feel with his foot the coils of line that he could not see. There was plenty of line still, and now the fish had to pull the friction of all that new line through the water. Yes, he thought, and now he has jumped more than a dozen times and filled the sacks along his back with air, and he cannot go down.
So in that last part, he managed to finally get to sleep. And then, fish comes up. So we're actually getting to the part where he may actually catch this fish 2 days later. So we're going to put that we are on the bottom paragraph of 83. And
why do you think Hemingway gives so much time, energy, Mr. Workman, to him, the old man, catching the fish? I mean, this goes on for pages. Some students have even said it's painful to read this. It's like, dude, are you kidding me? What game is Hemingway playing here? As you read about it, you get to experience what? Right? You get to kind of experience the challenge of doing something that you're not sure if it's going to work or not. Mr. McAfee, are you at all familiar with the famous Greek myth called the Myth of Sisyphus? Let's talk about the Myth of Sisyphus real quickly. Sisyphus is this cat who doesn't live a very good life. So when he dies, Mr. Workman, he goes to Hades. Now in the Greek version of Hades, everybody goes there. Got me? If you saw the Disney film Hercules, you are familiar that all people who die, their spirit goes into the underworld. Not, in other words, you don't want to confuse, Mr. Denise, the idea of the Greek Hades with the Christian notion of hell. There are different understandings. For the Greeks, everybody goes to Hades. And rarely are there punishment in Hades unless you're really bad. Sisyphus was one of those guys. His punishment, Mr. McAfee, is he has a huge boulder. He's got to push this rock all the way up the hill. I assume that you probably had heard this story. You maybe just didn't recognize the name. He gets the rock almost up to the top. And then the rock rolls back over him all the way back down to the bottom of the hill. He's got to turn around, walk all the way back down the hill, push the rock again all the way up to the... Almost gets it to the top again. The rock rolls back over him all the way back down. He does this over and over and over. So, now you can make an observation for your annotations. In what ways does it seem like the old man going off to get this fish is like Sisyphus and his boulder in Hades? Jot down how they're similar. How are they similar? In what ways do you see some contiguity there, Mr. McAfee, between the two? You want to share with us your view? How is going after this fish a lot like Sisyphus and his boulder? Yeah, it's like there seems to be no easy way out. Have you ever been in a situation like this where you're like, dude, I keep trying and trying and trying and nothing is working? Of course, the obvious question is, why do we keep trying if we know, right? Like, why doesn't the old man just quit? Like, for example, why doesn't he just let the fish go? Really? Okay, dude, you caught the fish. Let the fish go. This notion, he's just got to keep going. You got to keep trying. You got to keep trying. Okay? All right, we'll finish with those notes then. Put those away. And we're now ready for our annotation process. Now, instead of using annotation forms, we're going to just use a blank sheet of paper. So either go to the same sheet of paper or a different sheet of paper. You just hit this one twice.
I was hitting one.
That's it. And the text that we'll be working with, Miss Laird will have for you in a moment at the back. And the title of this annotation that we'll be working with is called "Oh Me, Oh Life." It's a poem by Walt Whitman. And we want to go and pick it up here in a second from the back. Okay? Oh me, oh life. Okay? So go ahead and come back and grab that real quick. Yeah, it looks like it's these two, right?
Right, because this is the last.
Now, if you look on your table there, you will see a large book that's orange. You're familiar with it as the freshman anthology. We've moved that to your table because after today, we'll begin to use material from that book as opposed to copies. Okay? If you happen to be absent and you're studying through our video and we reference a book or a text from that anthology, then all you do is Google that text to find it. So let's say, for example, if I hadn't made a copy of Whitman's Oh Me, Oh Life, all you have to do is Google Whitman and Oh Me, Oh Life, and immediately you'll find somewhere on the net a copy of the text and you can read along. Now, normally we're working with that form of the annotation Now you're just working with a blank sheet of paper. You log in, you put the title of the text as O Mio Life. You then will number down the left-hand side of the page our reading levels. 1. Do you see on your piece of paper that red line on the left-hand side? Right to the left of that red line, write 1, then skip a few lines. Write 2A, skip a few lines. Write 2B, skip a few lines. Write 3A, skip a few lines. And 3B, and skip a few lines. I think for a text this brief, you can put all of your annotative notes on the front of a single page, okay? I know in our normal annotation approach, it's providing you both front and back, but that's because we create a single document that looks a lot like what we would use for a longer, fuller text. This is not a very long poem, so you're probably not going to need a lot of room. Mr. Workman, question? 3A, 3B. You'll remember now. We're actually going to say these out loud just to review. Level 1 answers the question, what does the text say? This is our summary level of reading. So write that down. Summary level of reading. Level 1. Level 2, level 3, we divide, remember, into two parts. 2A, we answer the question, what does the text mean? That's right, what does the text mean? At 2A, major, what would we say, Mr. Denise? Themes, messages. 2B, we're talking about literary techniques, rhetoric, R-H-E-T-O-R-I-C. You'll maybe remember, Mr. Workman, that word. R-H-E-T-O-R-I-C, rhetoric. At level 3, we're answering the question, how does this text relate? Relate. And then at 3A, we ask, how does this text relate to other texts I'm familiar with? We like to begin with the texts we're most familiar with and studying at the present moment. And then finally, 3B, Mr. Denise, do you remember, how does this text relate to? Do you remember? 3B, how does this text relate to me, to myself? Very good. How does this text relate to me personally? Now, to be fair, and I think this will make some sense to you, when we do our jam writing after we come back from the break, I will often have you write personal responses to the text, which are ostensibly 3B kinds of responses. I ask you to think about the text and your relationship to the text. Now again, just to remind you and the way we use our language, we have two kinds of annotation. Annotation done on the page, in-text annotation, internal annotation. Annotation done off the page with your notes, external annotation. We will engage in both. Let's now turn to the poem itself. And the first thing we want to point out for your notes is that this is a poem by the great American poet Walt Whitman. Whitman. So write that down. That's the first thing we want to say. This text comes from his book of poems called, does anyone know? What was the title of his collection of poems? It's a single volume. Almost all of Whitman's poems ended up in this volume called Leaves of Grass. Outstanding, Mr. McAfee. Leaves of Grass. So, Mr. Workman, this is a poem from the edition called Leaves of Grass. Now, in your junior year, you will study in more detail the poetry of the great poet, American poet Walt Whitman. We don't have a lot of time, Mr. Denise, to go into all the things we talk about in our junior year about Walt Whitman, the great transcendentalist poet. Because we're in summer session, I don't do a lot of background teaching about these texts, these poets and the like, other than to maybe make a reference. So later in your junior year, if you have to study Walt Whitman, you'll be like, oh yeah, we did that poem, O Mio Life, in our summer session. Let's now turn to the poem itself. We'll simply follow the normal protocol. We'll read the text, and then we'll make some observations about the text. Again, when we read, you always want to follow along with me. If you struggle to keep up with my reading of the text, we need to work on your reading fluidity. Got me? On the other hand, if you can follow with your pen tip the fluidness of what I'm reading, you're doing pretty well as a reader. It's a good way to check yourself. O me, O life. O me, O life. Of the questions of these reoccurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, of myself forever reproaching myself. For who more foolish than I, and who more faithless? Of eyes that vainly crave the light, of the objects mean, of the struggle ever renewed, of the poor results of all of the plotting and sordid crowds I see around me, of the empty and useless years of the rest, with the rest me intertwined. The question, O me, so sad, reoccurring, what good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists, and identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you will contribute a verse. Now notice that when we annotate, the first thing we'll always do is to read aloud the lines. Then we go back and begin to work at level 1. Sometimes, though, I won't begin at level 1. Sometimes I will often like to begin at level 2, and more particularly, Mr. Denise, at 2B. I like to start oftentimes with structure, Ms. Hernandez. I like to look at a text and say, how is this text structured? How is it put together? Now notice, Mr. Workman, right away, that this poem at 2B is structured in 2 parts. The first part prepares us for a question. Jot that down. The first part, I'm working again at 2B. The first part prepares us for a question. The second part provides us the answer. Once you understand this, reading this poem is actually not that difficult at all. Whitman will begin by asking a question, but he sets that question up. The question is, can you put it in your own words? Does anyone know the question right away? What is the question of this poem? Let's just get it out of the way real quickly. At level 1, what is the question that he asks? We know what the answer is. It comes right after the word answer. But the question is the last line of the first stanza, There's kind of 2 stanzas, isn't there? What is that question? Can you put it in your own words? Anyone want to take a stab? How would you phrase it? What would you say? Go ahead, Mr. Workman, give it a shot. He says, the question, O me, so sad, reoccurring. By the way, what's the word reoccurring mean? Do you know that word? Over and over, right. He says, I keep asking this question over and over again. Then the question after the dash, do you see it? And then, Mr. Workman, I want you to put it in your own words. Read the actual Whitman's words for us. Nice and loud with your good reading voice. Yeah. We're reading the question, O me, so sad, reoccurring. The final line of the first stanza, dash. Then read the next words for us. Do you see it? The last line of the first stanza says the question. Do you see it? O me, so sad, reoccurring, dash. Now we're ready to hear what his actual question is. What is that question? Read it for us, Mr. Workman.
What good amid these, O me, O life?
Okay, now that's his question. But I asked Mr. Workman a different question. I asked him to put it in his own words, which is what he's doing right now on his annotations at level 1. What is the question that he asks about his life? You read the words as, what good amid these, O me, O life? But now I'm asking Mr. Workman to do some thinking of his own. I'm asking him to decide what really is the question that Whitman is asking over and over again, reoccurring. How would you like to say that one, Mr. Workman? What good amid these, O me, O life? What is the way you want to say this question? Mr. McAfee, you want to help him out? What is the question that Whitman asks? What good amid these, O me, O life? How would you say it?
Everything mentioned prior, what's good about it?
Everything mentioned prior in the poem, the lines that preceded, what's the good of it? What's the, how would we maybe say it, Mr. Denise? What's the point? What's the point of my life? What do you mean, what's the point of my life? Well, let's go back now, Mr. Workman, and work through these lines. Because he's going to say some interesting things about his life, which is going to maybe sound for one or two of us vaguely familiar. Notice he begins with line 1. O me, O life. Well, I don't need to read it. I've already read it. Go ahead, read it for us, Mr. Workman. You have an outstanding reading voice. Go ahead. I'll interrupt you as we go. Go ahead. O me, O life. Go.
O me, O life, questions of these.
Of the questions, go ahead. I'm helping you to learn how to read poetry. You must be exact. Exactitude is important even for a sophomore. Go ahead and begin again. O me.
O me, O life, of the questions of these occurring.
Did you notice that in this first line you have that ellipsis there? Do you notice those dot, 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 dot? So this will help you, Mr. Workman, to know how to read this. O me, O life, pause, of the questions of these, reoccurring. This will sound very much like the very lines that Mr. Workman read for us at the end of this stanza. Put it in your own words. He says, about my life, I keep asking the same bloody question over and over and over again. What kind of life does he live? Line 2. Go ahead, Mr. Workman. Nice reading voice for us.
Of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish.
People let him down. Right? People let him down. Faithless. Trains means more than one, huh? Cities filled with foolish people. Not wise people. Making stupid decisions. He lives, by the way, you might want to jot down this much. He lives in what city of America?
New York.
He does. He is the great poet of New York. Outstanding, Mr. Workman. What about the third line? Of myself. Go.
Of myself, forever reapproaching myself.
What does reproaching mean? What does that even mean? If you reproach yourself, what do?
You meet them over and over and over and over.
You accuse yourself. Yeah, you accuse yourself. In other words, you talk out loud to yourself, but you don't say nice things to yourself. You say mean things to yourself. Geez, what kind of an idiot are you anyway? You're talking to yourself. Remember in Old Man in the Sea? Our old man is always reproaching himself. He says things like, you must be some kind of wimp to not be strong enough to pull this fish into this boat. That's reproaching. For who? Go ahead in parenthetics.
For who more foolish than I, and who more faithless?
In other words, let's point out, Whitman doesn't call other people idiots and then leave it at that. He calls everybody else a fool, but then he also says, what about himself? He himself is also a fool. In other words, in this criticism of his life, nobody gets out alive. Everybody's foolish. Everybody's stupid. Everything is dumb. Look at the next line Mr. Workman will read for us.
Of eyes that vainly crave the light.
What does vainly here mean?
Scarcely.
Yeah, in other words, eyes want to see the light,
but rarely do.
rarely ever do. Keep going.
Nothing visible. Okay. Of the objects, mean.
Mean here doesn't mean cruel as much as it means useless. Useless. Life, he says, seems to be useless. Look at the next one.
Of the struggle, ever renewed.
It's not like he says I ever get a day off. Every day. It's another fight. I get tired of it, he says. Look at the next one.
Of the poor results of all.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Of the plotting in sordid.
Yeah, well done, Mr. Workman. Way to guess for me. Sordid. Good.
I've never actually seen how sordid is spelled.
Of the plotting and sordid what?
Crowds I see around me.
In other words, he says, when I'm in the middle of lots of people, does this sound like high school? He said, I want to say about them all that they're really dumb and stupid, but then I think about myself and realize I'm just like them. The whole project seems dumb and stupid. The whole thing of being alive. Really? What's the point? That again will be the question. Look at the next one. Oh, this one will sound familiar to one or two students sitting away in summer school. Read it for us, Mr. Workman.
Of the empty and useless years of the rest.
Of the empty and useless years of the rest. Go ahead.
With the rest me
Intertwined. Everybody's life, he says, is all kind of interconnected, and yet in the end, what is the point? Seriously? Why do I have to get up every morning? I'm giving you multiple renditions of the question. You obviously will want to be writing some of these down. I get up every morning. Why? Why do I do what I do? Mr. McAfee, do you recall from Shakespeare's classic Hamlet that the most famous soliloquy of all time asks the same question in the famous words of to be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing in them. Hamlet will ask, really? What is the point of all of this? I'm always interested when not just Mr. Workman but anyone else asks the question, really? The Unstoppable book? Really? Old Man in the Sea? Really? And then you just finish it. Every student will ask the, really? But see, Whitman takes it one step further and says, really? Your life? You got out of bed this morning. Why? Really? For what purpose? So you could eat breakfast. Why? So I could stay alive. Why? What is the point of all of this? That is a legitimate question, and it is a question that Whitman takes very seriously. See, here's the problem for most of us, and Whitman will say this in an earlier part of Lisa Crass. We stop being children, which means we stop learning how to ask real questions. A child will always ask why. If you've been around kids, "Oh, I need you to do this. Really, why? Because I need you to. Why? Because I want you. Why? And ultimately, what is it that moms ultimately say? Because I told you to. And dads will usually say, because I'll tear your little friggin' heads off if you don't do it, right? Okay? The kid will ask why. At some point in our schooling, we stopped asking why, and we just kind of did things. Notice how few students ever ask why. When the bell rings, everyone has to get up and leave the room like cows, walk to the next holding pen, sit back down and wait for the bell again. Nobody asks why anymore in high school. I remember a high school student saying to me, I'm dropping out. And I said, why? And he said, because I can't come up with an answer to keep doing this anymore. And I thought, that's pretty honest. At least he's asking why. Why do I do all of this? That's Whitman's question. And we want to point out, he takes the question pretty seriously. So seriously that he skips a couple of lines, doesn't he? And he puts the word answer there. And then he skips a couple of more lines. And one or two of us now are ready to sit up and listen to his answer. The answer to the question, what is the point of all of this? Seriously? His answer is an intriguing one. Well, listen to Mr. Workman's reading of it now. Take a look at his answer now. What is his answer?
That you are here, that life exists in identity. That powerful play goes on and you will contribute a verse.
Now, before we exegete, that is to say explain, I want you to write down in your own words, what is his answer? We'll listen to Mr. Workman's explanation in a moment, obviously. What is his answer? He gives an answer to the question, why this life? And Mr. Denise, we'll also hear from you in a moment as well. Jot down at level 1, what is his answer? Put it in your own words. Don't just think it, write it. Okay? Go ahead, Mr. Workman, write it down in your own words. What has he just said? What is the answer? I only got 3 minutes before we head off to our break, correct? So we want to take just a few seconds here. Notice he basically gives, did you see this, Mr. Workman? I'll give you a hint here. He gives 2 answers, really, doesn't he? He doesn't give 1, he gives 2. That, what's the first one?
That you are here.
What does that mean?
Why are you here?
You exist. You're breathing. See, think about how interesting this works, Mr. Denise. You can sit there and daydream. You can sit there and wish you were somewhere else right up until the moment your heart stops working. And I promise you, the moment your heart stops working, guess what? You are 100% tuned in to the very present moment because all of a sudden nothing's working. Your heart don't work. Your breathing don't work. Your breathing don't work. You're gone.
What about your brain?
See? Mr. Workman's dead on. He's bringing biology into it. You're gone. But notice how, Mr. Workman, we give no interest to the brain right up until the moment that it's not working. Whitman says there's something really important about the fact that you exist. You are here. This will sound at 3A very much like another text we were working with yesterday. Do you remember what the title of that one was? What was the title of that poem of yesterday? Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is, what's Longfellow call it? Life is what? Real. You exist. Life is earnest. You exist. So the first thing is, you exist. Life is real. Notice he uses the term identity. You are somebody. And we don't just mean your name, right? We mean something even more important than just your name. All right, what's the second one? It's an interesting word picture, Mr. Denise. What is it? Now we're not talking about life as battle and don't be a cow, be a hero. Now we're talking about a different word picture. What is it, Mr. Denise? Life is like a what? Last line of the play, or of the poem, I mean.
Play?
It is a play. What does he mean by that, a play? Life is a play.
It's all acted.
Oh, Mr. Workman says you have a play, you have to have actors. But wait a minute. He goes on to say something interesting about this play. The powerful play goes on, Mr. Denise. What's the final line, though? That you may what? What does that mean? Contribute a verse. Jot down in your notes at level 1 what that even means. To contribute a verse means what? How would you say it? Mr. Hernandez, how would you say it? Contribute a verse means what? This morning we were talking about walking on the beach and leaving your what? Your footprints, right, Mr. McAfee? We were using Psalm of Life in that way. Leave something behind to be remembered. Make your life memorable. Leave something behind. Okay? Write that down. That's an important concept as well. All right? All right, let's go to break. And we'll come back. Remember,